Good morning, everyone. Could you just help me the... good morning, dear hosts, dear speakers, dear participants. First of all, let me say thank you to our very, very new fund operator here in Wolf, and Norveška. I think today we're celebrating something new. We're celebrating the launch of the Active Citizens Day. But as Tina already pointed out, this is also the celebration of a process that has already come to a conclusion, and that is all the work that you have done on defining the program. You have defined outcomes, you have done a risk assessment, you launched just now a website to inform people about new opportunities, and you have done a stakeholder consultation, and I think many of you today in the room also have been involved in that, and I want to thank you for that and pay a real compliment to the host for this great process. I've been asked to speak about why the Active Citizen Fund is important, and as you know, I haven't been asked if it's important, so I think that's good. It makes my task easier, so there seems to be a general understanding that this fund is somewhat important. So allow me a few words on the EEA and Norway grants. So the overall context is, as already said, it's funding by Iceland, Lihtenštajn and Norway. It amounts to 2.8 billion euros in the current funding period, and it is distributed between 15 member states of the EU in Central and Southern Europe and in the Baltics. The overall objective is to reduce economic and social disparities, and it is to strengthen bilateral cooperation with the donor countries and the beneficiary countries. As a contribution to both these objectives, 10% of the grants are being dedicated to civil society support. So that is overall an amount of 200 million. It has been increased since the last period, and it is quite a relevant amount. And so let me tell you, why do we support civil society? First of all, this support reflects the donors' recognition that a vibrant civil society is really crucial in building democratic governance. It's based on the recognition that democracy means more than a majority rule, and that it is not possible to develop a resilient democracy without having the interests of all parts of society heard, first of all, and taken into consideration. Civil society is both a partner for governments, but it's also a watchdog. And NGOs, if they're independent, are in a unique position to promote transparency, but also accountability of the public sector. But NGOs are not only a building block for democratic governance, they also promote certain values, and I think that's really important and something I want to stress today. The programs of the EEA and Norway grants are based on a set of common values that includes, I quote, respect of human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law, and respect for human rights, including the rights of persons belonging to minorities. And if today, as we have seen in... Yeah? Slower? Oh, of course, yeah. So if today, if we see in certain European countries that NGOs are facing legal, financial, or even physical threats, these threats are often aimed at exactly these values and at the commitment of these NGOs to promote these values. And the trends of the last years have shown very clearly that we cannot take democracy and fundamental rights for granted any longer, and a strong support to civil society is needed to safeguard these values in a common Europe. The Active Citizen Fund has two major objectives all across the 15 beneficiary countries. These are civil society and active citizenship strengthened and vulnerable groups empowered. And I'm very happy that Tina already pointed out this second element, the vulnerable groups and the fight against prejudice, because that is an element I think that really is a characteristic of the EEA and Norway grants and of our Active Citizen Fund. There are 5 main areas of support. The first is democracy, active citizenship, good governance, and transparency. Second one is human rights and equal treatment through combating discrimination. The third one, social justice and inclusion of vulnerable groups. Fourth is gender equality and gender-based violence. And the fifth one is environment and climate change. Let me have a look back to the previous programming period and highlight a couple of things that we did with the 160 million euros that were available back then. So as you can see from here, NGO advocacy activities helped to change or to improve 330 laws, policies or practices. Nearly 25,000 citizens benefited from human rights support, and 430 NGO coalitions and networks were developed, and this way civil society was empowered to achieve sustainable impact. I think there's one thing that really stood out for me in the report from the last period, and that is that our grants were the largest single source of funding in the EU for NGOs working on democracy, the rule of law, and fundamental rights. And still, despite of that, only 10% of the proposals that are coming in can be supported. So we invest a lot, but still the demand for our grants is much higher than the available amounts. We are often asked, what is a typical project? And I find that a little bit difficult to say because we finance a diversity of approaches. And just to give an example of that, the Estonian Refugee Council and the Greek Refugee Council, they both do projects on supporting refugees. And in the case of Estonia, this means a roundtable of NGOs was established, and this roundtable did advocacy activities. It did a celebration of the Human Rights Day, an international conference. And then the Refugee Council in Greece said, okay, we have a lack of social services, of welfare services for refugees, so what we need to do is to provide these services and to assist refugees to access public services. So very different approaches, but in the same moment, very impactful. And there's other projects that really combine different approaches and methodologies. So there is an example that I got to know when I was not working at the FMO yet, at the Financial Mechanism Office. That was a project in Romania by Romano Butic, a Roma organization. And they created a project called Untold Stories. And the idea of that project was to create awareness in the Romanian population about the history of slavery of Roma 400 years ago. And they produced a theater play. They did something where they collected oral stories, folk stories of the Roma population. At the same time, they did advocacy, and they did conferences and this classical set of activities to change policies. And I think these are really exciting projects where these two elements come together. So for the new funding period, what has changed since then? So first of all, let me say that overall, the current grant period is very much built on the experiences from the last one. We haven't introduced radical changes. We have continued to do what has worked well and try to make improvements based on the lessons learned. Most importantly, the program will continue with a fund operator in each country. I think that's a specific model that we're also trying to promote because it has worked very well for us. The main changes are that at least 15% of the funding is supposed to go to capacity building. We want to see more sustainable and stronger organizations as an outcome of our funding. And Tina already mentioned this, we have stressed the importance to reach out to those NGOs that work outside the metropolitan areas and that work with hard-to-reach target populations and with smaller organizations. We have put more emphasis on the regional exchange between NGOs, which we think is really important for the mutual learning, for the peer learning. And finally, the program development process has been modified so that we want to involve all relevant stakeholders. That is the reason why there has been such a stakeholder process also in Slovenia this year. So, with that, let me wish you a successful launch event today. Again, I'm very happy to be here, and I thank you very much.